yeah, we can start there with intros.
Okay. I think the way that it worked was the other way around. So not from intents to MEV, but from MEV to intents. So because MEV causes block builder centralization, that was our main focus, and we think that intents mitigate that, because when we're designing our protocol, we're taking into account that MEV is a thing, and we're basically trying to use intents to mitigate bad MEV, and there's no way to completely get rid of MEV because it's like an emergent property of the system, let's say. But yeah, so block builder centralization is a threat, and we are hoping to mitigate that as much as we can. By the way, I'm Bikan from Essential.
Hey, I'm Roy. Great to be here. Speaking on behalf of Longhash. Hello? Okay, here we're back. Yeah, got into the intents and MEV space first as a user, just realizing that if it takes 10 to 20 steps just to swap one token to another, that cannot be the end state. There has to be a better way. Hello? Hello? From our firm perspective, we're heavily involved with staking and on-chain governance because of the portfolio companies that we have and supporting them in getting the proposals through some of the community forums, as well as a lot of the transactions that we do as part of our relationship with them. So we're very kind of mindful of potentially losing value as part of the process, and also on on-chain governance, a lot of times the votes will become increasingly complicated as protocols redeploy across different domains, and aggregating the votes together has also been a challenge from our experience. So that's how I got into intents and MEV.
Awesome. Question was, how would you get into intents, right?
Yeah, or maybe you could reverse it, what got you into even the MEV space at large, so.
Okay. European interest rates, they were negative. They called me and said, we have to pay for deposits, and I said no. And then I called a friend at Trail of Bits and said that you need to get me into this stuff. I need to find some yield for our deposits. And then I got nerd sniped by the liquidity white paper, and then MEV for that. And then I was surprised. I was surprised that the space had such a strong cultural direction, but the MEV space just went in the other direction. There it was like piracy, anything goes. If you're smart, you get to abuse the user, and I was like, that's a bit odd. Why is there nobody doing something against that? So basically looked into MEV protection and then met the Anoma team later. And then they basically gave me a long-term perspective and said, okay, MEV protection is too short-term. The real solution is solving. And since then we focus on that.
You didn't say who you are and what project. Well, you just gave a talk, so everyone knows. Okay, right. That's it. No. No, I mean, it's clear. You were just on stage. But hi, I'm Felix. I'm leading the technical development of CowSwap. We got into intents and MEV, I think, before it was called as such. When I joined Gnosis, the company that incubated Cow Protocol in 2017, I was made aware of thoughts that happened inside Gnosis on how we can make the markets that will power prediction markets as liquid and kind of permissionless as possible. The CEO Martin Koppelmann was even involved in some of the early designs of X times Y equals K style AMMs, and decided that this was not a good mechanism to follow precisely because they open up the door to these sandwich attacks, front-running manipulation at large, and concluded that basically we need a better system. We need a system where we just have a single price per token per block and not a pseudo first come first served system within the same Ethereum block. And so we started to embark on this idea of building batch auctions, and it turns out you can only build a batch auction if you are not accepting raw user transactions, but instead accepting intents. And then I think MEV, it really clicked in 2019 at the DevCon in Prague when Phil Dahan was basically presenting his paper on the observations that they made in his research group on the mempool, and how MEV, how it was coined then, was an actual threat to the decentralization of Ethereum, and that made us double down even more. And today, 5 years later, we are actually having an uniform price clearing batch auction running in production, and it's quite intense, and it's cool that to see that the rest of the ecosystem is now also moving towards that direction, and intense, and MEV protection is picking up.
Hi, Wei Hao from Toga Labs here, right? So we started trading in DeFi very early, right? All the way back in 2019, before MEV was a thing, right? So MEV was kind of forced on us, right? We're happily trading one day, and then MEV started happening, right? The profits started going down, so we had no choice, right? We had to look into things, right? Another thing that we do a lot of, right, is actually private market making, right? So one of the things that people don't think about is actually private market makers are the people who have been using intents for the longest period of time, because the RFQs that we sign are basically intents. We've been doing it since 2019, and we didn't know that it was called intents back then. But anyway, today I think it's a very vibrant space, right? So happy to be here.
Hi, I'm Connor, one of the co-founders of Enso. We're Solver and CowSwap. My first experience with, let's say, intents or MEV was 2016. I was frustrated the token utility of the ecosystem. You had to hold the token to interact with the dApp. So this first exposure of what we call intents, a project called Jinx I thought of back then, was to have ETH and then also buy the utility token, interact with the platform, and sell it in one transaction. That was 7 years ago. 3 years ago, done some strategies and then founded Enso. Enso now became a solver. We actually called intent shortcuts about a year ago. We thought it logically made sense for users to directly interact with DeFi instead of going to all the different interfaces. And that's how it was born.
Cool. All right. So first question is on OFAs. So the intent space has now seen implementations of a few different order flow auctions, such as batch auctions on CalSwap and Dutch auctions on UniswapX. What are some of the advantages or pitfalls you see in a variety of possible OFA designs? Are some OFAs better than others, or are OFAs overhyped and too complicated?
I guess whether some OFAs are better than others depends on the use case. But like for our protocol, we think that like for example, an English auction compared to an English auction, a Dutch auction is more like favorable because only the winner is revealed. So you don't have to reveal yourself, like whether or not you win the competition. So that's like one advantage of a Dutch auction over an English auction. And are OFAs overhyped? I don't think that it's possible to like not use OFAs. I mean, overly complicated designs, whether they have advantages over more simple ones is like a point for discussion, but I'm not sure whether like not using OFAs is an option when you're trying to come to a conclusion about like a winner solution, for example. Yeah.
I think having the auction process in itself is a huge improvement already, because it used to be kind of applying pricing curves on a per transaction level, and now applying pricing curves on a bundle level. And that's already sort of eliminated a lot of the adverse and toxicity in terms of the order flow. I'm very interested in seeing how the pricing mechanism could change given more encrypted mempools, because the fact that you have visibility into the intrinsic value of the bundle already is a value extractable process. So that's an area where I would like to see more experimentations around based on different auctions and private auctions.
I think there's two different types, roughly, of order flow auctions. There's the actual intent auctions, like CowSwap, and then there's just transaction auctions, like MEV blocker. And I think transaction auctions will become less and less relevant. They're still interesting, but the more you use intents and you have solvers or order flow auctions, the less there will be an opportunity for any backruns, right? This is mutually exclusive. You solve an order very well, or you solve an order correctly, there is no backrun. So there's no value left anymore. So the more interesting one are the intent auctions. And they're interesting, they're good because users can be more naive. Like it's harder to mess up. Right? You could just not know anything and still not get screwed, which is good. But they also are very hard to police, right? What I mentioned earlier of EV intent. As soon as you have more than one party that sees an order, it's almost impossible. There's probably mechanisms to know who abused the information. And this is something we worked on in Lisbon at the hackathon. We tried to limit that problem for the 1-inch resolvers by introducing a threshold encryption scheme so that only the resolvers could decrypt the intent. But still, as soon as you have more than one, and there's some other searcher who then uses that information, how are you going to trace that back? Which one was it? So that's, I think, a fundamental challenge at the moment of order flow auctions is you send something to multiple parties, then anybody can abuse the information, and you don't know who it was. You send it to one party, you know exactly who to blame.
And maybe to follow up on that, I think if you don't have a strong guarantee that your intent is going to stay completely private, then the best second thing you can actually do is make it as public as possible and hope for not just a single searcher or market maker to abuse that information and try to incorporate that information into the market, but have as many people show up to the time when your intent becomes valid and then compete for that execution. And at CowSwap, this is how we've dealt kind of with DAOs who, by design have to kind of be public about their intents because they usually are started in a forum thread or with a vote that is publicly known. So if a DAO wants to make a larger trade, of course there's other things that they can do, splitting it out over a TWAP order or but just generally if a DAO decides to dump the entirety of their treasury, that will have an impact on the market. And it's very hard to guarantee that you get privacy, and if you cannot guarantee privacy, the second best thing is being public. And maybe towards the point of the different, I agree with your classification and the different points of the different, in the intro we heard about Dutch auction versus kind of batch auctions and kind of what is the difference there. I think the trade-off here, what Dutch auctions allow to do is basically have they don't require an auctioneer off-chain that decides what is the best solution to be executed, because the price at which the user gets settled is basically dictated by the smart contract. So Uniswap X and 1inch Fusion don't have any off-chain party deciding which resolver gets the right to fill. It's basically a competition that happens on-chain, and ideally a solver or a filler can fill a transaction in block X and another solver only in block X plus 1, which means the user would actually get a better price because their curve in block X was higher than in block X plus 1. However, if you're making pretty large trades, or even for smaller trades, if you look at what is the step that my Dutch order curve decreases on in every block, you'll see that this can be easily in the ballpark of a few basis points. And so if you're making a large order as one of these Uniswap X or 1inch Fusion style Dutch orders, there's still, the price step is so discrete, and price movements also happen. So, if from one block to the other the price moves in your favor, there is actually improvement that you could get on the price that is dictated by your Dutch order. And this is something that those two protocols don't capture, whereas CowSwap really maximizes surplus beyond any fixed limit price that the user specifies, and then relies on this off-chain competition to basically have data availability consensus on what were the proposed solutions, but ensure that the entire value gets forwarded to the user. And I think, that's one of the fundamental differences. I think 1inch Fusion and Uniswap X reduce MEV to a certain extent, but don't eliminate it, also because they don't make use of settling trades directly with one another, obeying to uniform price clearing and some other aspects. But I think they are actually if you dive deep, they're actually surprisingly more different than maybe a lot of people think.
Yeah, to just continue on that, right? I think even between Uniswap X and 1-inch Fusion, they're actually quite different, right? And they incentivize very different kind of behavior, right? So if you look at this Uniswap X, right? Okay, you see that most of the flows are being filled by fillers, right, with inventory, right? Because it has a exclusive period, right? So it results in a certain kind of behavior, right? But for 1-inch Fusion, right, they don't actually have that, right? Actually, they supposedly have a delay, but it's actually very short, right? So when we fill, it's as good as there's no delay. So you actually see a lot more fills using on-chain sources. So it actually has, pretty interesting, right, how the design will influence the outcome a lot.
Yeah, I think they're all very interesting designs. I prefer the cow swap model a lot more to give the surplus back to the user. I think one thing that's very interesting is the privacy of the flow. So essentially all the solvers and anyone here is able to see the full request before it even hits the mempool. And this can be used against you. So.
All right, next question.
One sec. You mentioned on the coincidence of wants, there's actually nothing stopping a solver from peer-to-peer matching intents from Uniswap X against Uniswap X or Uniswap X against 1-inch Fusion. So these improvements of peer-to-peer orders, you can also do them completely across all the different intent layers.
They don't benefit the user in that for the other intent layers. They only benefit the Cosmos user because.
True. Yes. There's no guarantees that anything that will go back to the user, unless of course the peer-to-peer trade allows me to settle in an earlier block. Right? I can get a better price because I don't pay the AMM fees. So I can settle much earlier than anyone else who uses only on-chain liquidity. And another point on order flow auctions, I think that's very important, is that they introduce undeniably latency, right? Often like a full block or maybe more. And users who really care about speed, they unlikely will ever use an order flow auction. Like, I don't know about your users, what your experiences with Alfred. A good set of users, they care about speed much more than other factors. And that's a limitation of order flow auctions. I think that's important to consider.
All right, next question. Are permission intent pools, or some will call them like private order flow, the only way for solvers to fulfill best execution on behalf of users, or do we see a more permissionless path emerging?
A more permissionless path, I don't think we see a more permissionless path emerging, but completely private order flow. I guess as opposed to that, we are, so if it's like completely, let's think of like completely encrypted, let's say intents. It requires like a two-time handshake. So you have to encrypt it and then you have to decrypt it as a user when the time comes. And so it adds like a sort of latency and like some sort of bad user experience because you have to do the second handshake. So I guess the way that like maybe the best of both worlds, maybe not the best, but definitely like on the positive side, is a like commit reveal scheme, for example. So that also adds some that also has some latency problems, but because you can introduce a fully homomorphic encryption into it. So whatever you do on the encrypted intent also applies to the decrypted version. Like this is like a very like a simple way of explaining what it is, but so I guess commit reveal scheme plus fully homomorphic encryption is like maybe like better than completely private order flow, I would say, yeah.
On the note of FHE, some of the fastest benchmarks that I've seen are around like maybe 4 to 12 transactions per second. So we're still pretty far away from being able to leverage that technology across the intent layer. And I think as intents become increasingly customizable and serving different user purposes, they're also becoming a lot more logically intractable to reason about. And I'm a little bit concerned about overall like permissionlessness, as you mentioned, as more flavors of like liquidity pools and solvers being introduced and fragmenting that liquidity. And in order to service certain features of intents, like making it compliant, making it private, or just cater to different user needs, these like pockets of intents also are becoming a little bit more permission, because you have a limited set of places that you could go to serve a certain purpose. So this is where I'm spending a lot of time kind of thinking about, and how can we advance more collaboratively so that there's less of these like pockets that could become more permissioned and cost us the permissionlessness on the intent layer.
So the question was private order flow, permissioned solvers versus permissionless. I think we actually see both have advantages, and I think we see systems already that use both. Right? I mean, Uniswap X has a two-pronged system where you have an exclusive right for the quoter to settle within a certain margin, and then it becomes permissionless, and any filler can fill the order. So I don't think it's necessarily one or the other. And if you the Uniswap X model of quoting and then filling is a quite interesting one, because you are both optimizing for the user surplus first, because the quoters are competing for the user surplus based on the quote. And then after that, you go to the second stage where they're competing against each other. But by removing the competition for some period or some types of trades, you can much easier optimize for the user surplus. But then you should have this fallback. Like we did something similar with Angle a year ago, where they wanted to capture the MEV that was possible to be gained from changes in the Euro-USD exchange rate. So they had this one-to-one minting on their protocol, and whenever the Oracle delta was too big between two blocks, someone would arbitrage them and just basically make profit, and the Angle LPs, the treasury, would suffer. And so we included a one-block exclusive ARB for a specific executor running on through a router contract, and that router contract had a defined split where most of the profit would go back to the Angle treasury. And if we who were running the bot, if we didn't, because we maybe were down, if we didn't capture the ARB, then one block later it would just go back to the default, and anybody could ARB the pool and rebalance things, but then nothing would have changed to the previous state. But in this exclusive period, the in this case treasury and hence the user can profit more.
Interesting. How much would it cost somebody who wants to ARB it to basically censor your transaction in that one block? Did that ever, was the ARB ever big enough that this was worth it?
We never came across that.
Okay. I think one of the original question, at least as I understood it, was, do fillers and solvers have to use private RPCs, or is that like the only path forward? And there I would say, at least on Cow protocol, we actually see already a large set of settlements that don't require private solution submissions, just because if we are able to match people either through coincidence of wants or even with private market maker liquidity, and basically not tap into these manipulatable AMMs, there is no difference if the settlement transaction ends up in the first slot or in the middle of the block or at the end of the block. And so we can submit via the public mempool. So I think my hope to keep the public mempool alive long term is really to fundamentally reduce the MEV that we have on chain and find more ways of trading without these kind of flawed AMM mechanisms that have this time priority assumptions within a block. And if we have settlements that don't rely at all on them, we already today can just submit via the public mempool. So I think there's hope for the public mempool. Not a huge amount of hope, but some hope.
So all is peer-to-peer and market making.
Yeah, I mean, if it can be all, we also have ideas for bringing AMMs onto core protocols so that the AMM then also adheres to uniform price clearing. So I think the more we can move trade intents into a system that agrees to just settle at a uniform clearing price, the more you can implement an AMM as a cow swap order, where you just say, I want to have 50% of my portfolio in token A and 50% of my portfolio in token B, and even like have some X times Y equals K magic that makes sure that you only trade if that invariant is held. And so you can do all this stuff, and just basically we need to agree that we should have just one price per token per block. Then it doesn't matter if the relative ordering within the transaction within the block doesn't matter anymore. Long shot.
Okay, the way I understand the question, right, was why are all these OFAs today more permission, right? Why do you have to be whitelisted before you can actually use it, right? I think it's more born out of necessity, right? Because I think there's a lot of privileges, right, that you actually have in the system, right? So for example, let's take Uniswap X example, right? Okay, so if the quota is not whitelisted, right, anyone can come in and DDoS the system. Right, I can give you an extremely high price that no one can actually fill, and you're just kind of wait for a long period of time, and the decay is going to be horrible, right? So it's going to give everyone a poorer experience, right? So on Fusion, it's the same thing, right? There's no guarantee, there's no security bond, there's no nothing, right? Anyone who comes in can potentially screw up the system pretty badly, right? So I think it's out of necessity, right? But I think the goal for all the designers is, yes, we want it to be permissionless, right? We want it to open up to more people, but the question is, yeah, it's a problem that people can't solve today, because if you try to solve it right now, your product is not going to be out in the market, right? You're going to lose their product market share, right? So what they are doing right now is just the lesser of the two evils, right? Just make it permission, right, and buy itself more time, right, for some smarter person to come into the room and decide on a better solution. So I think this is the way I see it.
I think both will always exist. I think for centralized players, they'll want the permission environment, the cost of running the infrastructure, keeping up to date. They want that exclusive order flow. They don't want anyone else to even get access to it. And on the public side, I think the goal should be getting to permissionless. I think we've got a long way to get there for fillers to run their own infrastructure. What does that look like? Are they doing optimal routing? But to go back to the main point, I think there will always be both. And I think the main centralized players will always want the permissioned exclusive order flow.
Cool. Last question on solver centralization. More solvers is healthy for the space to promote best execution for users, but it's often a winner-takes-all space and heavily gate-kept, with the potential threat that one solver is executing the majority of intents. What steps need to be taken to prevent solver centralization, and how do we onboard more solvers?
To prevent solver centralization, I think the keyword is specialization. If the solvers can specialize in different types of intents, have different types of programs that specialize in solving different types of intents, then that would, if that was possible, then the centralization problem would not be there. And for this reason, we are building we're working on a DSL that's constraint-based, URT, for the users to be able to reason about intents, and for the solvers to batch these intents, combine them, and solve them. And we're hoping that this will onboard more solvers and allow specialization so that centralization goes down. Yes.
My answer is a little bit more out of the box. I think in order to avoid solver centralization, we're going to look beyond transaction solving and MEV in general. We need to open up new avenues of revenue. So right now, most of the transactions are more or less commoditized. One transaction that wants to swap ETH with GMX is basically the same as another. So in a commoditized market, you have diminishing you have economies of scale and diminishing marginal revenues, and so the more sophisticated, more centralized solvers can leverage that economies of scale, and that's because we're all sharing the same revenue stream. But if intents in 4 to 5 years pan out to be everything that we wish it to be and cater to more real-world use cases. So you're no longer just trading commoditized transactions. You're actually, helping people buy their pizza. You're actually trading like cars on chain. You're actually having more interesting use cases, real-world use cases of blockchain. That's when we can see more solvers that are specialized in serving certain purposes other than just settling trades. So I think if that does not happen, it's really hard to avoid centralization just because of sophistication kind of awards scale, and sophistication kind of gets awarded in and of itself. But I see if intents kind of pan out to be as rich and interesting as it is to real-world use cases, then we'll see more decentralization at a solver level.
I think there's two interesting questions. One is solving going to be a commodity or not? Right? If it's going to be a commodity, then just open source it, decentralize it, have many people run it, let the dApps run their own solvers. If solving is never going to be, or medium long term not going to be a commodity, and you need teams that continuously maintain and improve these systems, which I would argue there's many arguments for, but I don't need to go into that. Then you need to worry about centralization. But I think much more than in the case of like validator centralization, users and dApps, they have a lot of power here. And you can use intents to solve this problem. So naive would be, like, you don't want centralization because you want robustness. There need to be many players maintaining a system so that there's not one player gaining too much power. Well, why don't you just make an intent that says, my intent is a non-centralizing intent, and I require that it goes through a load balancer for solvers that makes sure that no solver gets more than 30%. I don't know. Like, as a user and as a dApp, you can do whatever you want. You could just encode that, or you could build that into this. And I think it's probably the easiest place to start with that is just awareness on the dApp level to work against that. And I don't think the solutions will be so complex to avoid that.
I think for us, the key to bootstrapping and preventing solvers centralization has been tokenomics. And I mean, we've not maybe done the most amazing job at it, but I think we're improving and iterating on how we can use incentives to bootstrap the solver competition. I think that's something we've done very well. And then in order to avoid centralization and this winner-takes-all mentality, I think the protocol can if the protocol has an idea of what a healthy competition looks like. For instance, in Cow Protocol, we've changed the reward scheme to no longer give like a fixed reward per solution, but actually look at the solution and see what was the best solver's response and what was the second best solver's response, so we can see the kind of incremental benefit that the best solver added onto the rest of the competition, and then make the reward dependent on that. Which then in turn leads to batches that are very well competed for, and where we have a lot of solvers already giving more or less the same competition. There's a very little revenue or little rewards being paid out to solvers. We're now working on ways of how in those batches we can actually regain some energy for the token and charge some of the value we already add to the user back to then use the token on other parts where competition may not be as decentralized as we want it to be, to incentivize more solvers to come in and try to compete. And so I think Ethereum is also doing this very, very well with EIP 1559, having kind of this in good times when everyone's using the chain like crazy, we're deflationary and we're burning Ether, and then when nobody's using the chain, we still emit Ether to secure it and are basically inflationary. And I think that model is something that applied to solver networks can prevent centralization.
You actively incentivize specialization. by doing that. Yeah.
Specialization, I agree with specialization as well, but even centralization. Like right now we compare ourselves, we compare the best to the second best solution, but we could even say we want at least 5 good solutions to be in the batch, right? And we could look at the top 5. So it really, that's up to the protocol to kind of think about and decide what is a goodness criterion, what's the healthiness score of your system, and try to then build tokenomics that improve the healthiness score.
Yeah, I think the solution is not that complicated. It's actually just making more information available, right? So, I mean, like, I'm not sure if it's a surprise to a lot of people that actually a lot of, let's say, traditional centralized exchange market makers have no idea, what solving is all about, right? So, because they don't know that, there are things like these that there's money to be made, therefore they have not entered the space. So you're not seeing the competition, right? So the moment it's made known, saying that, hey, okay, there's actually a lot, of opportunities over here, right? You'll see a lot more competition. Now, if there are not a lot of opportunities, right, then maybe you don't need that much competition at all. Then there will be more centralization. So it's really, if there's a lot of opportunities, then I think there is a case to be made, and it's really getting that information out there so that people are aware.
I think this is the purpose of the competition. If there's enough order flow, there's enough money to be made, more people will come. Naturally, we'll decentralize over time. I do like the concept of specialization in particular areas. However, that does centralize the specialization areas. For example, like we're one of the main solvers for DeFi tokens, and to a certain degree that's centralized between the ENSO and C solver. So if the competition is healthy enough on base token swaps or other particular areas, then the competition should bring more people to be part of the competition. Naturally, over time, should equalize.
Cool. That's it. Thanks, guys. Okay, so second to last talk, we've got Toka Labs. And yeah, this ate into a little bit of the time, so sorry. And then after that is Anoma, and then happy hour.